It's been about a week now since I did my original Warframe mobile video, and in the original video I had a lot of concerns about the game's performance, how it struggles on a up-to-date iPhone. To be honest, at that performance level I just am not happy playing it. It's cool that you can, it works in desperate situations, but from everyday play I would most definitely probably avoid it. As of only a couple of days ago, GE have only gone and done the only update I actually needed for the game to make me want to actively play it on mobile more than, say, 5 minutes to log in, and that's it. And that is they have added a 60Hz mode on mobile. In the options menu, you can now switch from 30Hz to 60Hz. Obviously, if you're used to PC, I'm sure you're used to higher frame rates and refresh rates and whatnot, but the feeling of playing this game at 30 FPS, moving to 60, is so night and day. Now, don't get me wrong, the game is not perfect still on mobile. It still has a lot of hiccups, and I've run into a number of frame rate issues and stutters while I've played since they've come up with the update, but it is the biggest step in the right direction they could have possibly made, and I think it's really going to help the mobile version of the title to actually stick around and be viable. Like, you can now play it at an actually good frame rate. Now, admittedly, you are still playing on mobile or on mobile with a controller. The mobile controls do require a little bit to be desired. I'm still quite happy playing the game on a mobile controller. Don't get me wrong. I've played this game on mouse and keyboard for 10 years now. Mouse and keyboard is always going to be the optimal way to play the game. But if you're someone that plays with controller anyway, or if you play on console, the difference between playing on console or mobile on playing on controller on mobile to console really isn't going to be that much different. I imagine the console versions run better. I've never played the console version of Warframe, but I'm still supremely impressed they managed to eke out this 60 FPS mode. Honestly, it needed it. The Warframe is not a game you should be running at 30 FPS or lower, because the game did stutter and it did have frame rate drops, and that was going below 30 FPS, so it wasn't even a particularly stable FPS. It was playable, of course. Any game is technically playable at 30 FPS, but nowadays, you know, the bog standard is, if you're going to play a game, it should really be at 60 FPS, unless it's for a stylistic reason. It just feels better to play. Never going to convince me otherwise, but 30 FPS is obviously very playable. It's just much preferred to play at a higher frame rate. And with this update, it has solved my main issue with Warframe Mobile. It now runs at a much nicer and a much smoother frame rate. It feels really nice to play. Don't get me wrong, it's still a little bit weird to play in some areas. For instance, open world, as to be expected, leaves a little bit to be desired. There's a lot going on, there's a lot of map to render, there's a lot of stuff that, you know, just a normal tile set, the game doesn't have to take into effect and can affect how the game runs. I'll have gameplay in the background of the relevant areas, but yeah, as you can see, it has some issues here and there. The 60 FPS isn't completely stable. It differs between 60, 40, 30 fairly consistently. Sometimes it does stutter, but they're so minimal that it hasn't affected the overall enjoyment of playing on mobile enough for me to go, nah, physically cannot do this. This is far too frustrating. Honestly, I probably wouldn't want to do something very time intensive. Like, one comment on the last video was like, hey, have you tried like 6 times Tridalon? I'm like, no, I'm not. But yeah, there are some areas that leave a little bit to be desired. Open world is definitely one of them. I also tried Archwing. I think that's the first time I've ever said this game mode out loud, and I honestly don't know if it's meant to be Archwing or Archwing. Anyway, with that game mode, it does not run particularly well. It still feels closer to 30 FPS than it does 60 most of the time, especially if you are, not even sure if sprinting is the right word, but, you know, activating sprint while flying around. It is quite rough, especially in some of the tighter areas. They're very hard to control. It is pretty inconsistent, and I wouldn't recommend playing that game mode on mobile, but thankfully no one really plays Archwing anyway, so it's not that big of a deal. For the most part, the best place to really play the game is on some of the smaller tile sets where a lot less has to be rendered. For instance, I played like a 10-minute survival. It ran pretty well. I had no issues really with it running. Again, there are some frame rate drops and whatnot, but that's to be expected. It's a very graphic intensive game. I don't have it on the highest graphic settings. I did at the very beginning just to see what it was like with 60 FPS on, and it wasn't a great experience. I would recommend tempering your graphic settings as needed. I quite happily liked mine at medium. Game looks pretty nice. I've not seen it blown up on my editing software yet, so I don't know how well it's going to translate from a mobile screen to a, you know, an actual monitor, but we shall see. But I'm playing at higher graphic settings than I was the previous video, and it's now at 60 FPS. And the game looks nice. Even at medium, it still looks really solid. The main thing that is obviously a really big concern, though, is power consumption is pretty bad. Not to mention, your phone heats up really, really fast. So in the 10 minutes I did a infected survival, my phone was pretty hot. Like, it wasn't, you know, impossible to touch, but it was not great. And I think if I was actually using my phone, by that I mean if I was actually handling my phone rather than a controller, the heat would be concerning me about how hot it was. So honestly, anything longer than an hour-long play session, I would be quite concerned about the health of my phone, shall we say. I imagine with updates and optimizations, it should make things a bit better, and with, you know, technology eventually catching up, higher-end phones are gonna perform better and hopefully have better battery life and heat displacement and all that. But coming from an iPhone 14 user, the game definitely starts to cook my mobile device somewhat. So much so that I think if I played for longer than an hour, I would be worried that my phone would melt into my hand. But overall, the 60 FPS update, massive change. Game changer, I would almost argue, because it means you can viably play the game at a more comfortable level than at 30. Warframe at 30 FPS is kind of rough because the game requires a lot of reactions pretty consistently, unless your build is pretty much just hold a button, everything dies. I'm looking at you, Mesa Prime. The increased frame rate makes the game, it just feels a lot more fun to play as well, and it's the smooth experience I would come to expect from Warframe at this point. I've played Warframe on PC for over 10 years. I know how the game should feel when playing it, and now that they've provided this massive update, it makes the game so much more enjoyable to play on mobile devices. So much so that I'm probably going to keep it on there. And I'll be honest, I don't play a lot of Warframe right now. I go through, you know, ebbs and flows of whether I play it for 100 hours in a month and then drop it for a year and then come back and then do the same thing again. That's usually the cycle. But at least on mobile, I can, you know, can drop in, do a cheeky little survival mission for 20 minutes if I feel like it, come back. Or just, you know, maybe if I'm out waiting for, you know, an appointment or something and I want to just get a quick grind session in, it's really nice to just have that option right there and then. Let's say a new Warframe was dropped and you need to grind out their new loot table. Yeah, grinding in Warframe can take hours on end, depending on how good or bad your luck is. But being able to just be like, right, I'm at the doctor's office, it's going to be like 20 minutes until my appointment starts. Let's just do a quick relic run or something, and then maybe the thing I want will drop. If it doesn't, so what? I've had fun, I've killed 15 minutes. If it does, then you save yourself some of the extra grind. It's just a really nice option to have that I imagine not a lot of players that already play Warframe will be using it as their main way of playing the game because they already have their preferred system. But I think for a lot of new players, this is going to be a really good option to stick to, especially with the new update. And those of us that wanted to be able to take Warframe away with us and actually enjoy it while we're away, being able to play at 60 FPS, absolute game changer. But yeah, that's all I really wanted to say. I just wanted to give a sort of brief update as to what's going on with the game, and it seems that DE are actually moving in the right direction with it, which is great to see. I would have hated to see the game kind of just left in its current state. But yeah, it's definitely becoming a really solid mobile port of the game that is very viable. Some of the harder stuff may not be the easiest to do, but I'm sure with a bit of finagling, people will figure it out. Anyway, with that, this video comes to an end. Thank you for those that stuck around to the end. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. Have you given the 60 FPS patch a try? What do you think of it? How does it feel? Are you positive for the future of Warframe Mobile / negative? Let me know down in the comments below. I've been James, the Mayor of JamessTown, and until next time, goodbye.